Every stone here has seen blood, and some still whisper about it. The square that recalls blood. Historian Alexandra Volkov had studied the Russian Revolution for 15 years. However, she'd by no means set foot in Palace Rectangular till the iciness of 2024. Now, status in the full-size expanse of snow-included cobblestones, with the iciness palace looming green and white against a gray sky, she felt the load of records urgent down like a bodily pressure. Dvortsevaya Ploshchad, her guide Dmitri said, the usage of the Russian call. Palace Rectangular, website of Bloody Sunday in 1905, whilst imperial troops fired on peaceful protesters. Web page of the October Revolution in 1917, whilst the Bolsheviks stormed the iciness palace. And the website online of... He trailed off, searching uncomfortable. The website of what? Alexandra caused. Nothing authentic, just tales, nearby legends. Dmitri pulled his coat tighter against the wind. The square has seen too much blood, humans say, too much violence. A few nights, particularly in iciness, especially when it snows like 1905 or 1917, the rectangular recollects. Recalls what? The entirety, everybody who died right here, every drop of blood spilled on these stones. The beyond does not stay buried in places like this. It echoes ahead, trying to manifest again. Alexandra had heard comparable folklore approximately other historical websites, battlefields that replayed their conflicts, execution grounds in which ghosts walked. She brushed off it as the human tendency to task meaning onto empty spaces. However, Dmitri's unease regarded authentic. She was in St. Petersburg to investigate her ebook at the October Revolution that specialized in first-hand debts from witnesses. She'd located letters in a Moscow archive written by using a lady named Katerina Sergeyevna, who'd been in Palace Rectangular the night the Winter Palace fell. The letters described impossible matters, time folding lower back on itself, the equal events taking place again and again, people caught in loops of violence they couldn't break out. The rectangular is alive, one letter examined. Now not inside the way someone is alive, however within the manner a wound is alive, uncooked, infected, refusing to heal. Each act of violence here feeds it, strengthens it. I saw the identical infantrymen die 3 instances that night, every time differently, every time greater terrible. I saw protesters shot down, then rise and be shot again. Time within the square doesn't go with the flow. Its swimming pools, it circles, it eats itself. I'm able to in no way move returned. I would rather die than stand in that location once more. Alexandra had assumed the letters were metaphorical, a traumatized woman looking to technique revolutionary violence. However now, standing inside the square herself, she wasn't so certain. The gap felt incorrect. Too big, too empty, too hungry. I need to spend time right here, she informed Dmitri. Days, maybe weeks. I want to recognize what humans experienced, to see the rectangular at exclusive times, different conditions. Bad idea, Dmitri stated flatly. Especially not at night time, mainly no longer alone. I do not consider in ghosts. Neither do I, however, I agree with within the square. He met her eyes. Promise me you might not come right here after darkish. Promise me you might not be right here on January 22nd. Why January 22nd? Bloody Sunday, the anniversary, the rectangular gets. Energetic on anniversaries. People see matters, enjoy things. Closing year, 3 tourists have been observed wandering the square at dawn, traumatized, claiming that they had been shot by imperial infantrymen. They had no physical injuries, but their minds have been shattered. They may be still in psychiatric care. Alexandra promised not anything. She changed into a scholar, no longer a believer in supernatural nonsense. She would conduct her research well, which meant experiencing the square in any respect hours, below all conditions. The primary week passed uneventfully. Alexandra spent lengthy hours in the rectangular, photographing, measuring, analyzing historic money owed at the same time as status inside the places they described. She interviewed locals, documented their memories, amassed folklore. One elderly lady, Galina Petrovna, advised her. My grandfather became there in 1917. He survived, but he became in no way the equal. He said the square had turned out to be a mouth, swallowing up history and spitting it lower back out. He said in case you stood inside the proper location at the right time, you could fall into 1905 or 1917, or any moment whilst blood was spilled. He said a few human beings never got here lower back out. In which did they pass? Alexandra requested. Nowhere. They are nonetheless in the square, nonetheless experiencing the instant of their death again and again, trapped in time's loop, not able to break out. Galena leaned closer. My grandfather shot himself in 1925. His suicide words stated he couldn't stand the recollections anymore, couldn't stand understanding what the square without a doubt became. He wrote, I am already useless. I died in Palace Square a dozen instances. I am most effective killing my body to enshape what passed off to my soul. Those memories observed a sample, trauma, mental breakdown, claims of temporal distortion. Alexandra documented them all, constructing a psychological profile of mass hysteria around a domain of historical violence. It turned into captivating research for a bankruptcy on how groups system disturbing memory. But then came January 22nd, the anniversary of Bloody Sunday. Alexandra had promised Dimitri she'd live away. However, her educational integrity demanded she study the rectangular on this great date. She placed herself close to the Alexander column at 2 p.m., the approximate time whilst troops had opened hearth on protesters in 1905. The square became busy with tourists, locals going approximately their enterprise. Not anything unusual. Alexandra checked her notes, comparing the contemporary scene to pics from 1905. She was so centered on her research that she nearly overlooked the alternate. The temperature dropped unexpectedly, dramatically. Her breath came out in thick clouds. Snow began to fall, however simplest within the rectangular, no longer in the surrounding streets, and the snow turned into falling upward. Alexandra stared in disbelief as snowflakes drifted up from the cobblestones, defying gravity, collecting within the air above the square like an inverted snowfall. The other human beings in the square did not appear to observe. They walked through the impossible snow without reaction. Then she heard it, remote voices developing louder, making a song, a crowd making a song, hymns and patriotic songs. She grew to become toward the sound and saw them, masses of people in early 20th century garb marching toward the Winter Palace. Guys in peasant coats, ladies in long clothes, kids holding icons and graphics of the Tsar. They weren't ghosts, no longer transparent or ethereal. They regarded strong, actual, as big as the tourists who walked through them without seeing them. Realities occupying the same area, one visible handiest to Alexandra. She watched, frozen, as the crowd approached the Winter Palace. Imperial troops materialized in formation, rifles raised. An officer shouted orders. The protesters persevered ahead, peaceful, unarmed, making a song. The primary volley tore through them. Humans fell, blood spreading throughout snow that turned into and wasn't there. The screaming started out, terrible, raw, the sound of mass slaughter. Bodies piled up. The snow turned red. And via all of it, the present-day travelers walked, unseeing, whilst Alexandra stood trapped among two instances, witnessing a bloodbath that had passed off 119 years in the past and changed into somehow going on again, right now. She tried to run, however her legs wouldn't flow. She became rooted to the cobblestones, pressured to watch because the Imperial troops reloaded and fired again as extra protesters fell, because the rectangular packed with blood and demise. Time stuttered. The scene jumped backward. The fallen protesters stood up, accidents recuperation in reverse. The group reformed, started marching again, singing once more. The troops raised their rifles. The bloodbath replayed. And once more, and again. Each generation slightly different, protesters falling in specific styles, bullets striking exclusive bodies, blood spreading in special instructions. But continually finishing the equal manner. Hundreds lifeless, the rectangular soaked in blood, the survivors fleeing while Imperial troops stood over corpses. Alexandra misplaced count number of ways normally she watched it repeat. 10 instances, 20, 50. Time had no meaning inside the loop. She was trapped in a moment that refused to end, pressured to witness the identical atrocity time and again. In the end, as suddenly as it had began, it stopped. The protesters vanished. The blood disappeared. Modern-day St. Petersburg snapped again into attention, travelers taking selfies, pigeons pecking at crumbs, visitors' noise from the encompassing streets. Alexandra collapsed to her knees, gasping. She checked her telephone. 2:47 p.m. Much less than an hour had exceeded in real time, though she'd experienced what felt like days of repeated bloodbath. Dmitri found her there, shaking and traumatized. "You got here besides," he stated unfortunately. "You saw it." "What was that? What befell?" "The rectangular remembered. It showed you 1905. Be grateful it turned into most effective a showing. Every so often people do not just watch, they enjoy it immediately. They turn out to be a part of the group, get shot via Imperial troops, die within the loop. Their bodies are discovered and not using injuries, however they are long past. Conscious, however catatonic, trapped in the memory of demise. It truly is impossible." "You noticed it. You inform me if it's not possible." Dmitri helped her stand. "Come, we want to leave before nighttime falls. Nighttime is worse. Night is when 1917 takes place." Alexandra should have left St. Petersburg, should have abandoned her research, conventional that some things couldn't be rationally defined. However, she became cussed, desperate to understand what she'd skilled. If the square should replay 1905, what would it not display on October 25th, the anniversary of the October Revolution? She waited, obsessively studying bills of that night. The Bolshevik assault on the Winter Palace, the Provisional Authorities' arrest, the start of Soviet rule. Records books called it relatively bloodless, a few casualties, minimal combating. But Alexandra observed contradicting deaths, suppressed memories, letters like Katerina Sergeyevna's that described something some distance more chaotic and violent. October 25th arrived. Alexandra located herself within the square at 9 p.m., the time when Bolshevik forces had entered the rectangular in 1917. Dmitri had refused to accompany her, had begged her not to go. She went anyway. The rectangular changed into dark, illuminated only by way of streetlights and the palace's exterior lighting. A few people crossed the space quick, now not lingering. The temperature changed into bloodless, but now not atypical. Then, at 9:21 p.m., consistent with her phone, everything modified. The present-day lights flickered and failed. The rectangular plunged into darkness, damaged best with the aid of fires, burning barricades, muzzle flashes, the wintry weather palace's home windows glowing with interior flames. The sound hit her like a bodily blow. Gunfire, explosions, shouting in Russian, the thunder of artillery. Bolshevik forces poured into the square from multiple directions, sailors from the Baltic Fleet, Purple Guards, revolutionary infantrymen. They were not ghosts. They have been stable, actual, occupying the same bodily space as the modern square. Alexandra stumbled backward as they ran past her, through her, some of them making eye touch as if they could see her too. "American," one soldier shouted at her in Russian. "Journalist, get returned, it's now not safe." Before Alexandra could respond, return fire erupted from the Iciness Palace. Bullets reduced through the Bolshevik forces. Men fell, screaming. The soldier who'd spoken to her took a spherical to the chest and collapsed at her FT, blood spreading across cobblestones that had been some way each 2024 and 1917 simultaneously. The attack persisted, waves of revolutionaries storming the palace, being driven lower back, regrouping, attacking again. However, something turned into wrong. The identical men stored demise again and again. Alexandra watched the soldier at her FT get shot and fall, then rise up and charge ahead, handiest to be shot again. No longer rewinding like 1905 had, persevering with a head but looping, the equal deaths going on time and again even as time moved forward. And there were other figures inside the square, ones that failed to belong to 1917. She noticed Imperial troops from 1905 firing into crowds of protesters who were not there. She noticed medieval soldiers, their armor and guns suggesting the times, whilst the webpage had been a marketplace and public execution ground. She noticed Soviet-era police beating demonstrators from later protests. All of them existing simultaneously, they all repeating their violence, they all trapped in loops of horror that the square had absorbed and now performed lower back like a broken recording. The square wasn't showing her the past. The square become the beyond, it all strayed away, each second of violence compressed into an unmarried eternal present. Alexandra tried to run. However, the ground underneath her feet felt unstable. As if she became standing at the floor of a pool in preference to stable stone. She took a step and fell through, no longer down, but sideways, into any other second. She turned into in 1905 again, in the crowd of protesters, marching closer to the wintry weather palace. She attempted to forestall, to shy away, but her frame wasn't below her manipulate. She became experiencing someone else's memory, reciting a person else's moment. She heard herself singing, although she failed to recognize the words. She felt wish and religion and desperate notion in the Tsar's mercy. Then the troops opened fire. Pain exploded in her chest, white warm, all-consuming. She felt snow in opposition to her face, tasted blood. She turned into death, and she knew she might die here, time and again, trapped in this loop for all time. She jerked out of it, returned to 2024, gasping and clutching her chest in which the phantom bullet had struck. No wound, no blood, but the pain lingered, echoing. "You're falling in," a voice stated in the back of her. Alexandra spun to find a female in early 20th century clothing, her face gaunt, her eyes historic. "You are experiencing what we experience. Welcome to the Rectangular's memory." "Who are you?" "I used to be Katerina Sergeyevna. Now I am just a ghost in a loop, death and loss of life and loss of life." The female smiled lamentably. "I wrote letters looking to warn human beings. Did everybody read them?" "I read them. I came here to analyze." "To research," Katerina laughed bitterly. "Constantly they come to analyze, to recognize, to file, and continually they get trapped, come to be part of what they are studying. The Rectangular doesn't want observers. It wants contributors. It needs more blood, more death, greater trauma to feed on." "How do I break out?" "You don't. Once you've got fallen through, once you have experienced death right here, you're a part of the loop. You'll relive it for all time, all the moments of violence, all of the deaths, forever cycling through the Rectangular's accrued trauma." As if to show her factor, time stuttered. Alexandra turned into in 1917 again, then 1905, then some earlier bloodbath she did not understand, then forward to a Soviet generation protest being crushed by means of police. Every second delivered ache, bullets, batons, trampling, burning. She died a dozen approaches in as many seconds, every demise entire and overall, everyone leaving psychic scars. She screamed, but her voice became lost inside the cacophony of centuries of screaming. The Rectangular had swallowed her, pulled her into its countless loop of violence and death. Dmitri discovered her at dawn, lying unconscious on the cobblestones. Paramedics were already there. Someone had referred to as approximately a girl collapsed within the square. They checked her vital signs and symptoms, determined nothing wrong physically, however she wasn't waking up. In the ambulance, within the clinic, within the psychiatric ward in which they finally transferred her, Alexandra remained catatonic. Her eyes were open but unseeing. Her body breathed but failed to circulate. On occasion she could twitch, cry out, as though experiencing pain from invisible accidents. Dmitri visited her, at the side of different locals who understood what had took place. They identified the signs and symptoms. She'd fallen into the Rectangular's memory, turned into trapped inside the loop, experiencing centuries of loss of life whilst her frame remained inside the present. "How lengthy?" a medical doctor asked Dmitri. "How long has she been like this?" "For all time," Dmitri replied. "She'll be like this all the time. She's nonetheless in Palace Rectangular, nevertheless dying over and over. Her body is here, but her thoughts is trapped in the loop. We've 47 others like her in establishments across the metropolis. Folks that went to the square on significant dates, who fell through, who were given absorbed into the trauma." "That's not possible." "So were her essential symptoms while you found her," Dmitri stated quietly. For 3 mins, according to the paramedics, she had no heartbeat. She turned into dead. Then she started out breathing again, however extraordinary. The rhythm become off, erratic, as though her coronary heart was looking to beat for a couple of timelines concurrently. The doctor had no response to that. Dmitri continued visiting Alexandra, even though he knew she could not hear him. He instructed her approximately different sufferers about the sample they had documented. Humans trapped inside the square's reminiscence, their recognition scattered across multiple violent moments, experiencing all of them without end and simultaneously. Some households ultimately pulled the plug on their catatonic spouse and children, not able to undergo seeing them like this. The bodies died, but Dmitri suspected the cognizance remained trapped inside the rectangular, now completely integrated into the loop, adding their trauma to the accrued horror. He commenced a website documenting the threat, warning people away. However, travelers still came. Researchers still tried to study the phenomenon. And on anniversaries, January 22nd, October 25th, and a dozen different good-sized dates, the rectangular have become lively, and a few more humans fell through, became trapped, introduced their loss of life to the everlasting cycle. Years exceeded. Alexandra's frame remained in the medical institution, maintained on feeding tubes, her mind lost in the rectangular's reminiscence. Her own family had given up, stopped journeying. She became a scientific curiosity now, a case examined in chronic vegetative states of unknown starting place. But Alexandra turned into far from vegetative. She became experiencing extra cognizance than any human turned into intended to handle. Dwelling through hundreds of deaths concurrently, her cognizance fractured throughout centuries of violence. She turned into the protester shot down in 1905. She became the modern killed in 1917. She was the medieval peasant achieved on the website. She was they all, death forever, part of the square's endless loop. And she wasn't on my own. Katerina Sergeyevna become there, and dozens of others, all of them trapped together, their consciousness woven into the fabric of Palace Square itself. They formed a Gestalt, a collective recognition of a massed trauma, experiencing each second of violence that had ever happened in that area. The square fed on them, on their struggling, developing more potent. Each anniversary, it reached out further, pulled in greater victims, brought greater trauma to its collection. It became turning into aware in its personal right, not conscious in a human sense, however conscious although, a geographical entity that skilled the world via the lens of violence and loss of life. In her clinic mattress, Alexandra's frame from time to time twitched, mouthing phrases in languages she'd in no way studied, Russian from specific eras, medieval dialects, the demise cries of 1,000 victims. Nurses learned now not to appearance directly at her at some point of these episodes. Her eyes, once they flickered open, confirmed images moving throughout them like displays, scenes of bloodbath, execution, revolution, all gambling simultaneously in her pupils. Dmitri kept his vigil, maintained his warnings. However, he knew it was futile. Palace Square could hold to lure human beings, would keep to feed on trauma, could continue to grow stronger. Ultimately, he feared, the rectangulars have an impact on might make bigger beyond its physical limitations, could begin to affect the entire town, pulling all of St. Petersburg into an everlasting loop of its most violent moments. He stood within the square now and again, in daytime, whilst it changed into ordinarily dormant. He felt the cobblestones under his feet and wondered what number of human beings' recognition was trapped in the stone, what number of deaths had been compressed into each rectangular meter. The rectangular become beautiful, the Iciness Palace's inexperienced and white facade, the Alexander column reaching toward the sky, the full-size open area that had witnessed a lot records. Travelers photographed it, youngsters played in it, lovers met below the column. And deep in its stones, within the areas between cobbles, within the memory embedded inside the very floor, hundreds of human beings died for all time, their awareness trapped in endless loops of violence, feeding a geographical entity that grew more potent with each passing hour. Alexandra died in her clinic mattress in 2031, 7 years after falling into the square's reminiscence. But her consciousness remained in Palace Square, nevertheless experiencing all of the deaths, nonetheless part of the everlasting loop. The rectangular remembered blood. It would always remember, and it would always starvation for greater. Palace Rectangular stands nowadays, beautiful and terrible, a wound in time that refuses to heal, a lure anticipating the curious, the scholarly, the ones who think they are able to recognize without being consumed. The past does not live buried there. It circles, loops, feeds on itself and on every body who receives too close. And somewhere in that everlasting cycle, Alexandra Volkov dies again and again, part of the square's reminiscence now, a part of its starvation, a part of the blood that soaked into stones and in no way without a doubt dried. The square remembers. It'll constantly consider. And remembering, it reaches out, hungry for more. The column's shadow. Photographer Ivan Sokolov specialized in architectural photography, and the Alexander column become his obsession. Standing 47.5 meters tall inside the center of Palace Rectangular, the crimson granite monolith topped with an angel had interested him due to the fact that childhood. What made it notable wasn't just its length or splendor, however the fact that it stood totally by using its very own weight. No bolts, no mortar, no foundation beyond a simple pedestal. 700 lots of granite balanced in ideal equilibrium, held in place via physics and precision. It shouldn't stand, his engineering professor had once instructed him. The calculations are not possible. Each simulation we run says it ought to have toppled within a decade. Yet it's been status seeing that 1834, through earthquakes, wars, revolution, almost centuries of St. Petersburg winters. Something continues it upright. Super engineering, Ivan had answered. Or something else. Now, in the wintry weather of 2024, Ivan had finally secured permission for an undertaking he dreamed approximately for years. Photographing the column at each hour over an entire 24-hour cycle, documenting how light and shadow transformed the monument throughout the day and night. The town had granted him unique, get entry to the rectangular after hours, whilst he may want to work without crowds. His assistant, a quiet lady named Oksana who'd studied artwork records, met him at sundown. They installation device across the column, cameras on tripods, light meters, markers for roll tracking. "Do you recognize the legend?" Oksana requested as they labored, her breath misting inside the cold air. "Which one? There are dozens." "About the shadow. They say the column casts a shadow that does not suit the solar's position. That at sure times, particularly at night beneath moonlight, the shadow factors in the direction of something buried underneath the square. Something the column turned into clearly constructed to mark, or to pin down." Ivan had heard variations of this tale. Every monument had its folklore. Auguste de Montferrand was an extremely good architect. He didn't construct monuments to mark buried secrets and techniques. He built them to glorify empire. Perhaps, however, Montferrand saved journals. Near the stop of his existence, he wrote about the column obsessively, claimed it needed to remain standing, that if it ever fell, something terrible would be launched. His very last access says, "I constructed it too nicely. It's going to stand all the time, but if it falls, God help St. Petersburg." "Superstitious ravings of a dying guy," Ivan said, adjusting his digital camera. However, he felt a chill that had not anything to do with the iciness cold. They commenced the undertaking at 6 p.m. because the ultimate daylight hours dwindled. Ivan took his first collection of shots, documenting the column's western shadow stretching throughout the cobblestones closer to the iciness palace. The entirety changed into ordinary, expert, exactly as planned. At 9 p.m., beneath streetlights, he observed the first anomaly. The column cast more than one shadows, not simply one, but dozens, radiating out from its base in all guidelines like spokes on a wheel. Ivan checked the light resources, streetlights positioned symmetrically across the rectangular. They ought to produce wonderful shadows from each source, sure, but what he changed into seeing changed into extraordinary. The shadows had been moving independently, moving and writhing like dwelling matters. "Oksana, are you seeing this?" She approached, checked out wherein he pointed, and her face went pale. This is no longer feasible. Shadows don't flow like that unless the light source actions, or the object casting them moves, or something's wrong with the shadows themselves, Ivan finished. They watched because the shadows continued their not possible dance, reaching out throughout the square, touching the rims of the cobblestones, then retracting towards the column's base. It seemed nearly functional, exploratory, as if the shadows were feeling round for something. Ivan photographed the whole thing, his clinical training overriding his growing unease. There had to be a rational rationalization, uncommon atmospheric situations, mild refraction, a few phenomenon he failed to understand but which might be analyzed and explained later. At the hours of darkness, the shadow observed what it turned into attempting to find. One of the tendrils, Ivan couldn't consider them any other way now, stopped shifting randomly and started out to factor regularly in an unmarried course, towards a spot approximately 50 meters from the column's base. As Ivan watched, the alternative shadows retracted, merged with this one, forming a single thick line of darkness that appeared nearly solid in the moonlight. "What is over there?" Ivan asked. Oksana consulted her ancient maps. Nothing now, but consistent with information from the 1830s, earlier than the square became absolutely developed. There has been a well there, and vintage well from medieval times. Montferrand had it crammed in and protected throughout the rectangular's maintenance. There had been court cases from people. They said the properly turned into cursed, that things were thrown down it over the centuries. Our bodies, in most cases. Criminals, political prisoners, those who had to disappear. A mass grave, Ivan said quietly. Greater than that, consistent with one account I discovered, it became referred to as the Well of Silences. People weren't simply thrown in dead. They were thrown in alive, left to die in darkness and isolation. Their screams couldn't convey up from that intensity. They have been silenced, forgotten, erased from records. The shadow from the column pulsed, developing darker and more defined. And Ivan found out he ought to see via it, now not as if it had been obvious, however as though it had been a window into some other place. Into some place deep and darkish and full of motion. "We ought to go away," Oksana said, her voice shaking. "This isn't always herbal, this isn't secure." However, Ivan became transfixed. He'd moved closer to the shadow without meaning to, drawn by photographers' instinct to file the impossible. He raised his camera and took a shot of the shadow, and in his viewfinder, he saw something that made his blood freeze. The shadow wasn't empty. There have been people in it, hundreds of them, thousands maybe, all pressed collectively in impossible density, all reaching upward. Their mouths have been open in silent screams. Their eyes had been empty voids, and they have been climbing, using every different as a ladder, seeking to attain the floor. Ivan stumbled backward, losing his digital camera. The viewfinder had proven him what the shadow simply become, not a trick of light, but a passage. A connection among the floor of Palace Rectangular and the properly of silences far below. And something became the use of that connection, seeking to climb up from the depths in which it had been buried and forgotten for centuries. The column shuddered, simply slightly, a vibration Ivan felt through the soles of his toes as opposed to saw. 700 heaps of granite, standing by its own weight on my own, had moved. "It's now not a monument," Ivan breathed, information flooding via him. "It is a seal. The column's weight, its stability, its impossible stability, it's not engineering. It is containment. Montferrand constructed it over the nicely to maintain something down there, to apply the column's mass as a plug. And now it is failing," Oksana finished. "The shadow proves it. Whatever's down there is finding approaches across the seal, attaining up through shadow instead of substance." As though to affirm her words, the shadow started to upward push from the floor. It wasn't flat anymore but three-dimensional, forming a pillar of darkness that stretched upward, mimicking the column's height. And inside that darkness, Ivan ought to see them greater truly now even without his digital camera. The silenced ones, the forgotten dead, hiking through shadow closer to freedom. The first one emerged at the top of the shadow column, pulling itself out of darkness into moonlight. It were human as soon as, but centuries within the well of silences had changed it. Its mouth turned into stretched impossibly huge. Frozen in a scream that had lasted goodbye, it had emerged as the creature's complete identification. It had no voice. The nicely had taken that, but it emanated silence, a crushing absence of sound that unfolded outward like a wave. Ivan's ears popped. He attempted to speak, to shout to Oksana to run, however no sound got here out. The silence changed into absolute, suffocating, the kind of silence you'd enjoy at the lowest of a deep nicely without a wish of rescue, no wish of ever being heard again. More of them emerged from the shadow, the silenced useless, every one a person who'd been thrown alive into the nicely of silences and left to die in darkness. Some wore medieval garb, others more latest clothes. Ivan identified Soviet technology uniforms, Tsarist period get dressed, even what appeared like ancient Rus apparel. Centuries of the forgotten, the erased, the silenced. They failed to attack. They virtually stood, mouths open, emanating that horrible, crushing silence. And wherever they walked, sound died. The wind made no noise. Footsteps fell silent. Even heartbeats became inaudible, even though Ivan could nevertheless experience his hammering in his chest. Oksana grabbed his arm, pointing frantically. The column became shifting greater highly now, swaying slightly, its ideal stability disrupted. And Ivan understood. The shadow changed into undermining the column's stability, developing a passage through space that weakened the seal. If the column fell, the nicely could be fully opened, and every soul that had ever been thrown into it might emerge, bringing their silence with them. Ivan picked up his camera, fingers shaking, and commenced photographing the whole lot. If he became going to die right here, and he became more and more positive he would, at least there might be evidence, documentation of what had came about. Via his viewfinder, he noticed even extra. The silenced ones were not alone. There has been something else coming up from the well, something large, something that were feeding on the amassed melancholy and demise of everyone thrown into the darkness. A presence that had grown strong over centuries, that had discovered to use shadow as a medium, that turned into now pushing towards the seal that had held it for nearly 100 years. The column shuddered again, more violently. A crack appeared close to its base, hairline skinny but developing. "We ought to seal it again," Oksana said, or attempted to say. Inside the crushing silence, Ivan could not listen her, but he examined her lips. "The column needs weight, desires balance. We have to." She failed to end the sentence. One of the silenced ones had observed them, changed into shifting closer. Its stretched mouth labored soundlessly, and Ivan realized it was trying to speak, to inform its story, to break the silence that had defined its life for goodbye. But the nicely of silences had taken its voice completely. It is able to only emanate the same crushing quiet it had experienced, spreading its trauma to others. Ivan subsidized away, but more of the silenced have been rising, surrounding them. They weren't adverse, simply desperate, wanting to be heard, trying their existence recounted after centuries of being forgotten. However, their very presence turned into lethal, their silence turned into suffocating, drowning out the whole thing inclusive of the organic procedures that relied on sound, heartbeats, respiration, neurons firing. Ivan felt his attention starting to fade, smothered with the aid of absence of sound. His heartbeat became arrhythmic, his respiration worked. He turned into being silenced, pulled into the equal country as the entities surrounding him. Via dimming vision, he noticed Oksana do something brave and terrible. She ran in the direction of the column, toward the crack spreading through its base. She pressed herself against it, including her weight, her mass, her substance to the seal. And she began to sink into the granite. No longer violently, slowly, almost lightly, as though the stone turned into accepting her, incorporating her into its shape. She seemed lower back at Ivan as soon as, her expression peaceful, resigned. Then she turned into long past, absorbed into the column, her body becoming a part of the seal, her life force used to reinforce the containment. The crack stopped spreading. The column stabilized. The shadow started out to retract, pulling the silenced ones again closer to the depths. They fought against it, reached for Ivan with determined palms, however the seal become holding once more, reinforced with the aid of Oksana's sacrifice. the silence lifted. Sound rushed returned, wind, distant visitors, Ivan's own gasping breath. The silenced ones have been pulled again into the shadow, backtracked to the properly of silences, their short freedom finishing. The shadow flattened, have become dimensional once more, then diminished to nothing extra than the column's everyday shadow forged by means of moonlight. Ivan collapsed to the cobblestones, his digital camera falling beside him. The square changed into quiet now, usually quiet, now not the crushing absence of sound he'd skilled. The column stood as it had for nearly 2 centuries, flawlessly balanced, giving no indication of what had just took place. Except Oksana become long past. Ivan woke in a medical institution, mattress 3 days later. He'd been found at sunrise, subconscious in palace rectangular. Laid low with extreme hypothermia and what doctors called acoustic trauma regardless of no apparent noise publicity. His cameras were intact, but each photo on them showed only everyday architectural photographs. The column, the square, trendy nighttime pictures. No shadows with people mountain climbing through them. No entities emerging from darkness. No evidence of what he'd witnessed. But Oksana turned into long past. Her own family reported her lacking. The police investigated, found her system in palace rectangular, but no other hint. Ultimately, they concluded she'd left of her own accord, even though they could not provide an explanation for why she'd abandoned the whole thing. Ivan tried to inform them the fact, but they assumed he'd had a few type of breakdown, that the strain of the venture and the bloodless had prompted hallucinations. He became cited psychiatric counseling. He returned to Palace Square once, weeks later, for the duration of daytime. The column stood as continually, remarkable and not possible, its angel dealing with toward the Neva River. Ivan approached the bottom, searching out the crack he'd visible for any sign of what had happened. The granite became seamless, perfect, displaying no damage. However, when he pressed his hand towards the stone, he felt something, a warm temperature that shouldn't be there in wintry weather, a diffused vibration like a heartbeat. And for only a second, he heard Oksana's voice, remote and muffled, speaking from within the column itself. "It is preserving," the voice appeared to mention. "But it might not keep all the time. The nicely is deep and what is down there is patient. Subsequently, the seal will fail once more. Subsequently, someone else will need to bolster it. That is how it has been in view that 1834. It is how Montferrand stored its status, now not through engineering by myself, however through sacrifice. Each few decades, the seal weakens, and a person have to turn out to be a part of the column to keep it." Ivan pulled his hand away, horrified. He researched the column's history obsessively. He observed gaps, unexplained disappearances of employees in the course of the column's creation, of protection crews over time, of curious historians and photographers who'd taken an excessive amount of hobby in the monument. All of them vanished without trace, all of them near the column, all of them probably absorbed into it to preserve the seal. He observed Montferrand's private journals in a French archive, those that hadn't been posted. The architect's very last entries were stressful. July 12, 1858. The column stands as it should, but I understand now the fee of its stability. I constructed it over something that need to in no way had been disturbed, that need to have remained buried and forgotten. The old properly was a prison of types, a place where silence itself accrued weight and awareness. Via constructing over it, I contained it however did now not cast off it. And containment requires consistent renewal. The column hungers. It need to be fed with lifestyles, with sacrifice, with those willing to end up part of the seal. I've sent 12 guys into the stone over those 24 years. I might be the 13th and very last contribution of my personal arms. After me, others will hold the column, although they may not apprehend what they maintain. They will sense its hunger and reply, including themselves to the seal when it weakens. That is my legacy, a monument that stands eternal, but only via eternal sacrifice. Montferrand had died in 1858, shortly after writing that entry. His body become discovered slumped towards the column's base. The legitimate motive become coronary heart failure, but Ivan puzzled if the architect had given himself to his advent, become part of the seal he'd engineered. Ivan stopped photographing monuments. He couldn't study architectural systems the equal way anymore. Every building, every monument, Each super work of construction now seemed sinister, seemed like it might be containing something, sealing something, requiring sacrifice to keep. He moved away from St. Petersburg, however the column haunted him. In Desires, he saw the properly of silences stretching down into darkness, packed with centuries of the forgotten dead. He saw them climbing, using each other as ladder rungs, slowly ascending closer to the floor. He saw the column beginning to tilt, the seal beginning to fail. And he knew that sooner or later, maybe in 12 months, perhaps in a decade, the shadow would attain out again. The silenced ones might begin to emerge. The column might crack. And someone might want to press themselves towards the stone, to be absorbed into the granite, to reinforce the seal with their life and substance. Someone usually did. It really is how the Alexander column had stood for 190 years, through the whole lot St. Petersburg could throw at it. Now not via engineering genius on my own, however through sacrifice. Ivan wondered if he will be the next one. If one day he'd experience the column calling, might go back to Palace Rectangular, would press his hand towards warm granite and sense it pulling him in, accepting him, making him a part of the eternal seal. He puzzled if Oksana turned into still aware inside the stone, if she should feel the burden of 700 lots pressing down on her, if she experienced time usually, or if being part of the column distorted her belief into something eternal and unchanging. He wondered, however he didn't cross lower back to find out. A few questions have been better left unanswered. The Alexander column nonetheless stands in Palace Rectangular, red granite gleaming within the sun, its angel blessing the town. Travelers photograph it from every attitude. Engineers wonder at its impossible balance. Locals stroll beyond it day by day without giving it a second idea. But from time to time, someone will forestall and press their hand in opposition to the stone. They may sense that subtle warm temperature, that faint vibration like a heartbeat, and they will listen voices, remote and muffled, speak me from inside the granite. Some turn away, disturbed however secure. Others stand there longer, listening, being drawn in. They feel the column's hunger, understand its want, apprehend that the seal is weakening once more and requires renewal. The ones don't shy away. They press nearer, and the stone accepts them, attracts them in, adds them to the eternal seal that keeps the nicely of silences closed, that forestalls the forgotten useless from emerging, that continues the containment over something historic and horrible that sleeps far below Palace Rectangular. The column stands. It has stood seeing that 1834. It's going to stand for centuries greater. However, its stability comes at a fee, a charge paid through people who get too near, who apprehend too much, who listen the stone's starvation and answer its call. Ivan Sokolov lives in Moscow now, as some distance from St. Petersburg as he can control whilst final in Russia. He doesn't image architecture anymore. He works in portraiture, shooting living faces, reminding himself that humanity is heat and respiratory and transient. But once in a while, past due at night time, he feels a pull, a calling from 700 kilometers away, from a red granite column's status in the center of a grand square. The column recalls him. It is aware its mystery, and at some point it will name loud sufficient that he may not be capable of withstand. The seal will need strengthening again. It constantly does. And there is always a person who answers the call, who turns into a part of the monument, who trades their short life for eternal responsibility. The Alexander column stands, beautiful and terrible, a monument to empire and a jail for something some distance older. And inner it, Oksana and dozens of others hold their vigil, part of the seal, part of the stone, eternal guardians of the nicely of silences. The column will by no means fall. Not so long as there are those inclined to come to be part of it. Not so long as the seal may be maintained via sacrifice. No longer as long as people remain curious sufficient to get too near, to press their palms in opposition to warm granite, to hear the voices calling from inside. The column stands. It's going to always stand. And the charge of its standing is measured in human lives, absorbed separately into purple granite for all time. the wintry Weather Palace's 1,000 rooms. Museum curator Natasha Fedorova had worked on the Kingdom Hermitage Museum for 8 years. However, she'd in no way heard of room 1001 till she located the important thing. It was tucked into the again of an old catalog drawer, labeled in faded ink. Kao emanata 1001, Enyatakea Aryurvata Yeri room 1001, do no longer open. The key itself became uncommon, black iron, ornate, some distance older than the constructing's 18th century construction. It felt incorrect in her hand, too heavy, too bloodless, as though it were kept in a freezer instead of a drawer. What's room 1001? She requested her supervisor, Director Volkov, a stern girl in her 1960s who'd worked on the Hermitage for 40 years. Volkov's face went pale. In which did you locate that key? Within the antique catalogs. Is it critical? Vital. Volkov took the important thing from Natasha's hand with obvious reluctance. The wintry Weather Palace formally has 1,786 rooms. We provide excursions of approximately 400 of them. The relaxation are storage, workplaces closed to the public, but there may be no room 1001. Formally, it doesn't exist. Then why is there a key? Volkov became silent for an extended second, weighing something. Ultimately, she said, the Iciness Palace has a hassle. The building's footprint is massive, 60,000 square meters. However, whilst architects attempt to map the interior, the maths does not paintings. The rooms take up more area than the building consists of. It's as though the interior is bigger than the outside. That is impossible. Yes, yet each survey involves the equal conclusion. There are rooms in the Winter Palace that should not geometrically exist. Volkov surpassed the key back. Room 1001 is one in all them, or so the tale is going. I've in no way visible it. Neither has anybody presently operating right here. The ultimate man or woman who claimed to have entered it turned into a curator named Mikhail Sorokin in 1979. He turned into determined 3 days later inside the Egyptian collection, catatonic. He died in a psychiatric sanatorium 6 months later, in no way having spoken some other coherent word. What did he see? No person knows, but his scientific information described intense trauma, as though he'd skilled something his thoughts could not manner. And they located something unusual. His body showed signs of getting older inconsistent with the 3 days he became lacking. His hair had grayed. His joints showed a long time of damage. The medical doctors predicted he'd elderly 15 to 20 years in those 3 days. Natasha looked at the important thing in her hand. Why preserve this if the room is so risky? Due to the fact a few rooms cannot be absolutely locked and forgotten, they require upkeep. Every 10 years, someone is meant to check room 1001 to confirm the seals to make sure it remains contained. Volkov's expression became grave. The final check turned into in 2014. It's 2024 now. The room is due for inspection. And you need me to do it. I want you to return the key to where you located it and forget about it exists. However, in case you're curious, if you insist on knowing, then sure, a person wishes to check. And better you than an innocent who stumbles upon it by twist of fate. Natasha need to have listened, ought to have back the important thing and walked away. However, she dedicated her lifestyles to information the Hermitage's collections, its records, its secrets and techniques. The concept of a room that rejected geometry, that drove human beings mad, that required periodic monitoring, it became impossible to resist to her scholarly thoughts. How do I locate it? She asked. Volkov gave her instructions that sounded greater like ritual than navigation. Visit the pavilion corridor at exactly 3 a.m. Stand earlier than the peacock clock. Whilst it chimes, and it is not wound, depend to 100. Do not appearance away from the clock. When you attain 100, flip precisely 90 tiers for your left. There can be a door. It might not have been there earlier then. Use the important thing. That is insane, Natasha said. Yes, however it is the way you locate room 1001. The room exists between spaces, out of doors everyday geometry. You may simplest attain it through ritual via planned goal. That's also what makes it risky, As soon as you have carried out the ritual, once you found the door, you have created a connection between yourself and something's in that room. Natasha lower back that night, lengthy after the museum had closed. The hermitage at night became eerie, substantial halls stretching into shadow, heaps of artistic endeavors looking with painted eyes, the burden of centuries urgent down through ornate ceilings. Her footsteps echoed on parquet floors as she made her way to the pavilion corridor. The peacock clock stood in its normal place, an 18th century automaton, a Baroque myth of golden peacocks, owls, and different mechanical creatures frozen in eternal stillness. During the day, it changed into occasionally wound and set in movement for VIP site visitors. At night, it became in reality a stunning, silent machine. Natasha checked her watch, 2:58 a.m. She located herself at once in front of the clock and waited. The minutes crawled through. At exactly 3:00 a.m., the clock chimed. The sound became incorrect, not the joyful mechanical bells she'd heard during daylight demonstrations, however something deeper, greater resonant, nearly organic. The golden peacock's tail fanned out, but the feathers moved sluggishly, as though the mechanism becomes suffering in opposition to accelerated resistance. Natasha commenced counting. 1, 3. She kept her eyes fixed at the clock as informed. The peacock's eye, typically a vacant glass sphere, appeared to be looking her. 21, 22, 23. The pavilion corridor turned into changing. She should see it in her peripheral vision. The partitions had been shifting, receding, the gap expanding. But she did not look far away from the clock. 53, 54, 55. The mechanical owl rotated its head completely round, something it wasn't designed to do. Its beak opened and closed soundlessly. 87, 88, 89. At 100, Natasha turned exactly 90 stages to her left. There was a door, plain, wood, absolutely out of vicinity in the ornate hall. It hadn't been there whilst she'd entered. It wasn't on any ground plan. However, it became undeniably real, strong, waiting. Natasha inserted the black iron key. It became easily, and the door swung open on silent hinges. Past changed into darkness, not the absence of mild, but a thick, tangible darkness that appeared to face up to her flashlight beam. She stepped through. The door closed at the back of her, with a valid like a coffin lid. Natasha located herself in a hall that shouldn't exist. The partitions have been the same as the pavilion corridor, ornate moldings, parquet flooring, but they stretched impossibly some distance, curving in approaches that harmed to study. Doorways coded both aspects, masses of them, every numbered in a script that seemed to shift between Cyrillic and something older, something that predated modern-day writing systems. She turned into searching out room 1001, but the numbers made no feel. She passed room 732, then room 892, then room 1438, then room 4. The sequence became random, or observed a logic she couldn't apprehend. Her flashlight beam appeared weaker right here, slightly penetrating the darkness. She heard sounds, muffled voices, footsteps, track playing on scratchy phonographs. They got here from in the back of the doors, however, whilst she pressed her ear in opposition to them, the sounds stopped, replaced through respiration. Heavy, ready breathing, as though something on the opposite facet was listening for her. She kept walking. The hall appeared to stretch all the time, branching into other corridors, growing a labyrinth within the wintry with her palace's impossible geometry. She checked her telephone for the time, but the screen confirmed best static. Eventually, she found it, room 1001. The door became special from the others, larger, made of dark wood that appeared historical and water-damaged. The variety turned into carved deep into the timber instead of painted. And not like the alternative doors, this one became protected in symbols, defensive wards, she realized, recognizing some from her studies of Russian Orthodox iconography. Others were older, pagan, pre-Christian, in all likelihood pre-Slavic. Natasha tried the black iron key. It fit flawlessly. The door opened, and she or he stepped into room 1001. The room changed into tremendous, some distance larger than the corridor need to have allowed. The ceiling disappeared into shadow above, and she couldn't see the away's walls. The ground became included in water, No longer deep, simply an inch or however cold and perfectly nonetheless like a mirror. And inside, the center of the room stood a throne. It turned into stunning, carved from dark timber, inlaid with gold and treasured stones, upholstered in cloth that might once have been red velvet but become now faded and rotting. It became in reality centuries vintage, likely from medieval ruse, lengthy earlier than the wintry Weather Palace turned into